The Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network presents The Monstrous Regiment, featuring a roundtable of Dominion women seeking to honor Jesus Christ in applying God's Word fearlessly and faithfully in all callings and seasons of life, both in and out of the home, reversing the curse and smashing pagan strongholds.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Monstrous Regiment. I know it's been a while. Obviously, I don't need to tell any of you that in the United States and to an extent the whole world, we're experiencing a cultural moment that is totally unlike any in recent history. Not unlike any in history, but in recent history. And it's stirring up a lot of different feelings and discussions. Some people are afraid or angry or hurting or excited or hopeful or feeling like they're just now waking up, or a combination of all of these things. So I want to have a discussion about some of this. Some of us have the luxury of paying attention to the things that are going on in the national news when they're in the national news and when they're being shared on social media, because they're being shared on social media. But for others, this isn't news at all. It's a reality that they have to cope with and live with for their entire lives, for generations. So whatever the case, there are a lot of different kinds of hot takes out there, some better and some worse than others. So how are Christians looking at these events? And more importantly, how should we be looking at and responding to them? That's the question that we want to ask today. And joining me to help answer some of these questions is Shatoya Bradley. She's a writer, an editor, a designer, a creator of truly beautiful, spectacular fashion. And we're just very delighted that she's agreed to talk to us today. Hello, Shatoya.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited about being a part of the show today.
Thanks for coming. So let's just jump right in. Can you just start by giving us a little bit of information about your background, both your personal background and your experience in the church and evangelicalism?
Sure. So I'm originally from South Georgia. Lived there all of my life until I got married at 19 to my high school sweetheart, and he went in the Air Force, and so we traveled around, stationed at various different bases, and really got a chance to really, in my opinion, experience life with getting to know different people from all walks of life, different cultures and stuff like that. So as far as the church, I was raised in a church. My stepdad was a Baptist minister. So church was just like a normal part of my life. Every Sunday and during the week, Bible studies and choir practices and youth group and stuff like that. So, my husband and I, one of the things that I really enjoyed about traveling while he was in the Air Force is that we got to be a part of so many different types of churches, because for me, I grew up in a all-Black Baptist church. So the only culture I knew as far as within the church was, what I grew up in. So we got a chance to join different churches that were a lot more ethnically diverse, and the music and everything was different. So that really helped to give us a better understanding of what Christianity looks like in America. And we still have friends that we made from all of these different states that we had an opportunity to live in. So, I guess I'll mention about my husband and I have been married for almost 19 years. We have 6 kids, 5 boys and 1 girl.
Oh, so, wow.
Yeah.
Where does the girl fall in the mix?
She's actually the youngest.
Oh my goodness. Good for her.
Yeah. Oh, and I do want to mention, so growing up, I have, 4 brothers. Not 4, 3. Yeah. I'm getting mixed up.
No, I know. I'm from a big family too.
I have 3 brothers, 2 older and 1 younger.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so that's kind of cool. I had a not an exactly same experience, obviously, but I was in the military for a while. So I lived in the Savannah area back in 2000 or 2001, somewhere around there. But yeah, I had a similar experience with traveling around to different bases and different sort of church environments. But
Yeah.
So you have a pretty impressive resume as far as the work that you're involved in. Let's talk about your fashion design. I was looking at your website. It's amazing. What got you into fashion design, and why is that meaningful to you in general and as a Black woman?
Well, I've always loved fashion. Like, one of my nicknames when I was in high school was Skittles, because I would come to school and I would always have these dresses or outfits on with like all of these colors. And I think for me, it originated from my love for collect flowers when I was younger. I kept like a notebook of all these different flowers that just stood out to me whenever I was outside playing. And so I would keep a book of them and then I would look up everything about them, the scientific name and what type of climate they grew in, or state, what states they were native to and things like that. So I've always had a love for colors and patterns, and for me it was a way for me to express myself. And I think that that tends to be true within Black culture. I think part of it is because when you look at the history of African Americans in America, our culture was taken away from us. And then when you look at cultures around the world, African American or Black culture around the world, you see vibrant colors and patterns. So it's like a way of us expressing ourselves. And I think in America, you may see it in a more bolder way, because there's been so much suppression of our culture and us being taught that our hairstyles or the way we dress or carry ourselves doesn't fit in with the dominant culture. Mm-hmm. So for me, fashion is a way for me to be able to express who I am culturally. And, I guess because in a sense too, I'm kind of a rebel. I like to stand out. So, yeah.
Good. I love that. Yeah, I know we were chatting about that a little bit before this, about how sort of one of the subtler ways that white supremacy, expresses itself is in this unspoken ideal of behavior, of dress, that like, and where you vary from that is where you're varying from the standard. So
right. And that was one of the issues that I saw, was the type of clothing that I wanted, I couldn't find in stores, especially for me coming from a small town. So I started to realize it's because in dominant culture, they're mainly sticking to the grays and blacks and, really the kind of like safe colors.
That's me, I'm all blue.
Like, I remember in the workplace, you're not allowed to wear certain colors. They want you to stick to like a certain color palette. And I think it's, I don't know if necessarily they realize that they're kind of, you're like undervaluing people or forcing them to suppress who they are culturally because it's something that's frowned upon or that it's not accepted within society. So
right.
That was one of the reasons I set out to create fashion that people aren't finding in not supermarkets, but in malls or shopping areas. So
yeah. Well, I love it, and we'll share your website when we share this episode. But on that same note, do you have any thoughts on the difference? So the difference between, I guess, cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation when it comes to uniquely Black fashion.
Right. Well, I think that it's a very touchy subject for some people. Like, I mean, even in the Black community, there's some people who they don't have an issue with someone wearing something that I guess would traditionally be thought of as strictly like African or African garb or something like that. But I do think that there's a way to show appreciation for other cultures without it being looked at in a way that suggests that you're I don't know, I guess in a sense to where it's looked at as you're it's like some sort of token or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so I think that
like the kneeling in Congress a couple weeks ago.
Right. I took an issue with that because I didn't feel that it was genuine.
Right.
But from when I read from their perspective, apparently there were others within the National Black Caucus that encouraged them to do that. So I think that's where, even with everything that's going on in America, you have different African Americans that see things differently.
Yeah.
So for me,
point that it's not a monolith.
Right. For me, the situation with them wearing the African attire that they had on, I just felt that it was political. Mm-hmm. So I think that anytime somebody is doing something and it's the motivation is political, there are going to be people that are going to take issue with it. Or if, like I've seen where people will wear African type, I will say like cultural attire, but then it becomes like it's a photo op, or, you know, they're doing it to see if they can get attention or something like that. I think people will notice that and then they'll take an issue with that. But if somebody is just appreciating, because I look at fashion as art. So yeah. if you're the type of person where you're wearing something because it appealed to you, you like it, and I don't see an issue with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's helpful, yeah. Especially because I definitely want to buy one of the bags on your site.
Yeah.
The colors are just gorgeous.
Yeah.
I love your use of color. So obviously your experience as a Black woman, as a Black business owner, as a member of the church, mm-hmm. didn't start last month when this sort of cultural moment started. So are you able to give us some insight into your experience in the way that you've been treated, in the way that in some of the issues that you've seen before this sort of moment happened?
Well, so I think I'm going to share probably something that a lot of people didn't know about me as far as my background. So for all of my adult life, I was I guess as they would describe it, I was a staunch Republican, conservative Republican. Okay. So, and a part of that experience, I used to be the managing editor of a more so political news media website. And so I was essentially being groomed as Candace Owens before there was a Candace Owens. So yeah, which is crazy when I think back on it now. But what happened was the guy that I was working with, and he's been on Fox News like numerous times. But I knew going into, before President Trump was elected, that there were things about him that I just, that just didn't sit well with me. And so I would bring up those issues to him, and he initially felt the same way. But as we got closer to the election, I started to see kind of like a shift in how he talked about Trump, and so it, for me as a Christian, and he was a professing Christian as well, it just, the Holy Spirit just really started to convict me about a lot of it. And I noticed that once I brought it up to him, it was no longer about following your convictions, but it seems as if he was really just trying to follow us and push a certain narrative. And so he was beginning to compromise on what he had shared with me that he believed. And I was in a position where I had to decide, do I want to continue in this as a career, or do I feel like I'm in a position where I'm going to have to compromise on what I believe as a Christian in order to continue being engaged the way that I was in the Republican Party. So I ended up leaving, but it was a really nasty situation, like me leaving. And he started spreading a lot of rumors about me becoming a liberal and all these things. So, which is like, okay, whatever. But so after that, I took about maybe 2 or 3 years from just any type of political engagement. I took the time to step back and befriend people who believed different than I did. And, I really thank God for that experience, because it allowed me to take the political talking points out of it. Mm-hmm. And instead of putting people in a liberal or conservative box, I had a chance to just get to know people and see what really spoke to their hearts as far as what they're seeing in society. And from that, I really grew to appreciate and gain a better understanding of what the Bible says about how politics and really things in society should reflect our faith. And so, so here I am now. I thank God for so many of the people that I've met through the Level-Headed Reconstructionist group, and I feel like God just used them to really just open my eyes up to such a better understanding of the gospel and how it should influence our political action.
Right.
Yeah.
And not vice versa. It seems like,
right.
It seems like a lot of people have that'll probably resonate with a lot of people, because at least in my experience, obviously, I can't speak to the experience of a person of color, but in my experience with women, it's like you can be perfectly acceptable, like with your experience with the Republican activism. You can be perfectly acceptable in evangelical and in Republican circles as long as a woman, as a person of color, as long as you're towing the party line. And then as soon as you start to challenge that, it's like, so I guess what I'm saying, I've met a lot of people who have said that they never experienced sexism or never experienced racism in the church. And it's like, well, it's not necessary to express those things as long as you're saying and doing the things that you're supposed to be saying and doing. But as soon as you vary from that at all, that's when you start to notice it,
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened, because a lot of our, my husband and I had close relationships with a lot of our church family from our church in Montana, in which we were the only the only Black family in the church. And so at that time we were conservatives. And so, but as we started to drift away from where we started to see there were certain things within conservative ideology that just wasn't shaped by a gospel perspective. And so as we started to kind of discuss those things, the relationships that we had with some of our white Christian friends and family, it changed. And that really hurt and affected us because just like you said, it was as if like we were accepted as long as we were the Black conservatives. But as soon as we start to say, well, you know what, on the issue, when it comes to justice or racism, we're noticing this or that. And then it's just like, oh, you're a cultural Marxist or critical race theory. And it's just, they start just, instead of us being able to have like meaningful dialogue as Christian brothers and sisters, it became where it's like a liberal versus conservative type of thing. And we get nowhere. And I think I mentioned that before, that it's like these things happen in our nation, like what's happening now, and people start to respond the same ways. And it's just like, well, how do we get past the politicalness of it all and get to the gospel part of it all? And how do we, as white Christian brothers and sisters, Black Christian brothers and sisters, how do we work together so that we're an example to the world versus us being in the background kind of hashing it out while the world is just coming up with all of these different solutions that don't involve the gospel.
Right. Absolutely. I know we're going to touch on that more in just a minute, and I am really looking forward to that because that's so important. The flesh and blood versus powers and principalities, tribalism thing.
Right.
So I hate even asking this question because it feels like even having to ask it is like 20 steps behind where we should be. But what do you say to white people who try to tell you, or Black people, that systemic racism isn't real? And how do you define systemic racism?
Okay, so I think the best way to describe it would be to think of racism in terms of, like, we know when it comes to racism, most of the time people are associating it with a feeling. That somebody either looks at another person based on their skin color and says that person is less than in some way or another.
Right.
But systemic racism, it involves power. So if your racism is able to be enforced through laws and practices and procedures, then that's where I would define it as systemic racism, where when we look at the 13th Amendment that was supposed to abolish slavery or abolish chattel slavery, but when you look at the exception, they made an exception to it when it comes to prison labor. And so you see from that point how it was systematically a system that targeted locking up Black men. You know, they came up with ways to criminalize acts that are just, when you look at them at face value, is just insane. Mm-hmm. And so you see from whether it's the prison industrial complex or education, housing, jobs. There were practices and systems and policies put in place to oppress Black people in ways, and then some of those systems are still in existence today. So one thing that I do find interesting that I would bring up to white people is the fact that, especially white Christians, it seems as if racism is the only sin that they view as not needing to be repented of.
Right.
You know, like there's nowhere in American history that we can look back and point and say, okay, the white church responded in these ways concerning the racism that the churches participated in during slavery and Jim Crow. Like there was no acknowledgement of it. So with that being said, how did it just disappear?
Yeah.
You know, if it's never been something that the church has actively dealt with, I'm not sure how they would say that it is something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's almost like the sort of classic abuser response, where it's
Right.
like always turning the focus to the victim being more forgiving and letting it go instead of ever acknowledging the
Right.
victimization that happened. Right.
And I think too, it's part of the problem is that so much of, as far as in the American church, so much of our views are shaped by politics versus, by the gospel. So we're, instead of our first instinct being, okay, how do I listen to this brother or this sister and really get an understanding of what the issue is for them, it's like immediately I'm going to come with Black on Black crime or abortion, these same talking points. And then that just kind of, to me, it's like a wall.
Yeah.
Once you bring those things up, there's no dialogue that's going to happen, because the person that you're speaking with is going to get defensive, and then that's going to put the other person more for them to feel like, okay, well, let me bring out even more conservative talking points, so that and it's like I believe that there are genuinely a lot of us who want to see change. We want to see, we care about the flourishing of all human beings, and we want to see, especially the church, be a beacon of light for the world. And I think you and I talked about this, but when we look back at the feminist movement, we see that even still today, the church criticizes the feminist movement, but just like with the Black Lives Matter movement, we have to ask ourselves, well, where is the church? Why is it that the church is always 10 steps behind? And, those who we would say are within secular society are the ones that are attempting to address issues that we have the answers to. If we are followers of Christ, we know that the answers to what we see going wrong is we're not effectively engaging the culture with the gospel.
I'm so sorry, you cut out for just a second. Can I get you to go back just one sentence?
Yeah, I was saying we have the answer, but we're not effectively engaging the culture with the gospel.
Right.
And so it's like we're left to criticize the Black Lives Matters movement, or criticize whatever movement it is that attempts to do anything when it comes to solving a lot of the issues we see in society.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, we did talk about this before. I agree. It's like it's like we're experts at throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
And sometimes there's not even that much to throw out. And it's like the Bible tells us to correct oppression. And every time someone tries to correct oppression, the church's response to that is to deny that the oppression exists because they don't like the way that it's being corrected.
Right.
So you touched on this already, but obviously, Monstrous Regiment, we have a special focus on women's issues in the church. Do you have any thoughts on how being Black and being female intersects in a way that someone like me wouldn't have thought about?
Well, I think for one, maybe there's a lot of Black women that contributed to addressing like women's rights in America, but nobody really, like, they're not really recognized as far as what the role that they played in advocating for women's rights, as far as like voting and things like that. But I think that there's a lot that we have in common when you think about what white women have how they have been treated historically in America, as far as the way that they were viewed as second class, and they were only fit to be at home, and education was frowned upon when it came to women. So I think that some of those same sentiments are Black women have went through in one way or another. And so I think maybe the uniqueness is that we didn't have primarily white women that, when they were advocating for women's rights, they weren't including Black women.
Right.
So I think that that's one of the issues that I see, is that when women we think that as women there would be some sort of
solidarity.
Yeah, but there isn't, and so it's like sometimes I feel like the women are more hostile. White women are more hostile to Black women than white men are. So,
yeah, I mean, we've seen that a couple times. I mean, I don't know, not necessarily directed specifically at Black women, but we've seen a couple times just in the last few weeks, white women sort of weaponizing their whiteness against Black men in very horrifying ways.
Right.
Not funny, but and as I've been trying to educate myself a little bit, it's been interesting to see how, like you said, there should have been a solidarity there. Right. And so you see in history white women trying to sort of speak up against their own oppression, and at the same time suppress the voices of Black women. And you see the patriarchal mindset of men trying to suppress the voices of women, including Black men trying to suppress the voices of Black women, and it's like you said, it all comes back to power, and where there's that intersectionality of worshiping power, all the vulnerable should be joining together and recognizing each other's, joining forces with each other. Right. But every time we get a chance to like exert our own power over another group, we do.
Right. And then you see the solidarity that we do see is in the modern feminist movement. Mm-hmm. So again, which still leaves the question, where are the women in the church? Why don't we have solidarity the same way we see the feminist movement today that's advocating for all of these things that we know aren't necessarily gospel gospel solutions.
Yeah.
It's like they've gone to the extreme where many of them hate men in general, and so their approach is just to attack men and to make it as if all men exhibit toxic masculinity. And so, it's just, I don't know. I just feel like there's more that we can be doing as Christians. Mm-hmm. And I do feel really hopeful at everything that's currently happening now, because I feel like there is some progress being made as far as us being able to have like real conversations with each other and listen to each other and just figure out like, where do we go from here?
I feel hopeful about that too. I feel like if there's anything I'm afraid of right now, it's that this energy will die down too soon.
Yeah.
Or that we'll accept like half measures instead of pushing for the whole thing, you know. But it does seem like there's advancements being made in the dialogue, at least.
Right.
So just as a disclaimer on this next question for the audience, because I'm trying to listen to various voices and be sensitive to the things that people are saying. And I know I've seen several Black men and women like on social media say, stop asking us this question. So I'm only asking this because it was one of the questions that was on your list that you wanted to answer. So what were your initial thoughts after seeing the now famous George Floyd video and his death at the hands of the Minneapolis police officers?
For me, I couldn't even make it through the entire video initially because it was just so emotional for me. I mean, part of it was I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Yeah, same.
And then the other part of me was just like, how many times have I seen something like this before? You know, and for me, I have 5 sons.
Right.
So when I finally did watch it and just hearing him call out to his mother, it just, I mean, I didn't know what to say other than just to be filled with compassion for him, because I feel like when you watch it, you get a sense that he knew he was going to die.
Yeah.
And so, he was at that point where he was just saying, whatever was on his heart out of fear, just knowing that his humanity was being taken away from him. And for what reason, Right. So for me, it was a lot of emotion, anger, frustration. I couldn't help but think about my 5 boys and what we've taught them. But and then there's the side of me that was just like, there's a police car there. Why didn't they? If they have him handcuffed, why not just put him in the car? Like, what's going on here? So it's just, I think probably for a lot of people, it just didn't make any logical sense, even if you're looking at it from a perspective of what police normally do when they arrest somebody. So,
yeah, it didn't make any sense. I'm not going to add to your commentary on that because that's perfect. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. So we touched on this a little bit, and I'm not even sure. I think I might be more accused of being more liberal than you in my views on this. But so I've seen a lot of stuff regarding the statement Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of Christians sharing articles that are like 10 reasons I can't support the Black Lives Matter movement or whatever, which is as a friend of mine pointed out, really interesting coming from people who do support Trump and share Tucker Carlson. You know, it's like, where do we suddenly stop caring about that stuff? But so what are your thoughts on the slogan, on the statement, on using it in the cultural place that we're at? And is there a difference in your mind between using the statement and supporting the organization that goes by that name? And is it even a problem?
Right. So I'll say this, and I hope that maybe people that will end up watching this will really listen to what I'm saying. I could say for majority of Black people, and I could say, and I'll just say for myself, I had never been onto the Black Lives Matter website to even know, like, in detail what they stood for, what they believed or didn't believe. And I think that was the case for a lot of Black people. We're just now finding out a lot of their beliefs and about the founders and stuff like that. So for me, I initially gravitated, or what attracted me was what they were saying. Mm-hmm. It came out after Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I think for a lot of Black people, there's no way that we can separate the affirmation Black Lives Matter from what we know has happened to Black Americans historically in America. And for most people, that's what they care most about, that it's a way for them to say, we know what our grandparents and great-grandparents have shared with us, the type of racism and things that they've went through over their lifetime, and then they've passed those stories down to us. We know that that's one of the things that, even with Dr. King, that he was trying to say. Black lives matter. We matter. We're human beings. We want to be treated and seen as human beings and not judged based on the color of our skin, and not dehumanized. And so I think, yes, when I went and I looked at Black Lives Matter organization as far as what's on their website, there's tons of things that I disagree with. But for me, honestly, I don't financially support Black Lives Matter, the organization, and I don't advocate for everything that they list on their website as far as what their agenda is. Mm-hmm. But for me, I stand behind the affirmation, and I think that if white Christians have an issue with Black Lives Matter, the organization, I feel like, well, what's stopping them from speaking against racial injustice? Why would you allow what you disagree with in Black Lives Matter, the organization, to prevent you from speaking on issues that you know the Bible says that we should? So
right. That seems really telling to me, when people are
right.
more vocal about speaking up against an organization that has some statements they disagree with than they are speaking up against the injustice that right. organization is trying to oppose.
Right, because and the way I brought it up, I spoke to somebody who's a Trump supporter, and I said, well, would you say that you support everything that President Trump has ever said or done in his life? And, from that perspective, they know that there are certain things that they, even though I may disagree, there are certain things that they like or respect about President Trump. And there's things that they probably, they won't probably say it, but there are things about him that they dislike.
Right.
And in the same way with Black Lives Matter movement, even though I disagree with a lot of the tenets or a lot of the things that they advocate for, I do appreciate the fact that they decided that they were going to take a stand for the type of injustice that they saw taking place towards Black Americans rather it be at the hands of police or, really, or anybody. And so I feel like that's something that I can stand behind, but I do want to mention that I did get a chance to go to a protest near where I live. And we live in a predominantly white town. And so for me, it was great to go to a protest and see, like, I was the minority and hear all these people holding up signs saying Black Lives Matter and I don't understand, but yet I stand, with you, basically. And I even saw posters that were saying, pro-life isn't selective, and so it was emotional for me seeing, especially in a predominantly white area, seeing so many people come out and they're not there criticizing the Black Lives Matter organization. They see that people in their community or people in America are hurting, right. Black people and people of color, and they know that people often say, well, if I was alive back during slavery or civil rights movement, this is what I would have done. Yeah. But I feel like, okay, white people are being presented with that opportunity now. Amen. It's like, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing differently than what you saw done in the past?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Whatever you're doing right now is what you would have been doing then.
Right.
And I mean, it just seems like the statement itself, Black Lives Matter, is so obviously unreproachable, Right. The lives of Black human beings should be treated like the lives of all other human beings. There's nothing to disagree with there. And I will say too, and this is my personal opinion, I don't represent anyone else here when I say this, but I haven't read everything on the Black Lives Matter website. I've read a little bit of it. I've seen some people object to it because of some of the things that they say about like LGBTQ communities and
right.
things like that. But I'm just going to say Black trans lives do matter. Like, I don't right. understand how Christians could even have an objection to that. Right. It doesn't matter whether someone is like living the way that you think. That's like saying, if people object to saying Black trans lives matter, it's like objecting to saying the lives of, people who live together before they get married matter. Like, whatever lifestyle you're living, right. you're an image bearer of God, and right. your life does matter. So if there is disproportionate injustice against Black trans human beings because of, their skin color or their orientation or whatever, we should be speaking up on their behalf. Right. And if we refuse to, how are we being representative of Christ there,
Right. I think that for a lot of people, they feel like if they support, like if I speak about the injustice that that gays or transgenders face, then somehow I'm accepting of their lifestyle. I think that some people think that, they make it into it's a either or type thing when it isn't.
Right.
Like you said, we should care about the flourishing of all human beings,
right.
To the glory of God, no matter where they come from or what they've done. Because, one of the things that really bothered me recently is, like, in Atlanta today, they're having the for Rashard Brooks.
Yeah.
The Atlanta Constitution and some of the various other local Atlanta news are covering it. And you go into the comments and people are just like, why are we celebrating him? And, they bring up this whole list of things that he's done. And I'm just thinking, and then you go into these people's pages and they have scripture and you're just like, something isn't connecting if you're saying that you're a follower of Christ but you refuse to see the humanity and to see somebody as an image bearer of God, regardless of what they've done, the bad decisions that they've made in their life. They're still a human being, and they have a mother and a father, and oftentimes they had children, a wife. And so it's like their families are mourning, regardless of the circumstances that led to them dying. And certain people feel like certain things the police are justified in doing the things that they do. But I think that's one of the things that's really, especially as a parent for me, it's really sad to see that we're still dealing with this today, where people don't value people, and just like there's no love for just people, and just for them just as human beings.
Right.
It's like as soon as one of these cases happen, they're looking up this person's background. Did they have a criminal record? What type of pictures did they have? Were they looking like a thug or this or that? And it's just like, wow, I would hate to be on the other end of that. The person that's being viewed that way. And I think most of us would agree we don't want to be. We wouldn't want our entire lives to be. All of the bad decisions that we've ever made to be what defines us for the rest of our lives.
Right. And they're totally irrelevant to whether we deserve to be murdered.
Right.
That's the craziest thing is that the default for Black people is that they have to prove they were good enough people to not deserve to be murdered.
Right.
And that's not, anyone who says that systemic racism and white supremacy don't exist, like it's insane that that's where we immediately go.
Well, I think the fact that their response, the fact that a lot of white people respond the way that they do suggests that they know that it exists, but they just I think it's a combination of they don't know how to address it, or there's some guilt that's involved in it. And and it's political. They've politicized it in such a way to where if anybody shows any sort of remorse or expresses any sort of guilt or they feel as if, okay, they're becoming a liberal or something. I don't know.
It's all tribalism, but it's like you see admonitions all throughout Scripture to like defend the weak and the fatherless and the poor and the widow and the destitute, and no qualifications where you only defend them if they had no sin in their life and they were like, the Bible doesn't say that all widows and all poor people are totally sinless. It says defend them because they're vulnerable to injustice, Right,
and then we see in Scripture where God uses people that have some, what we would consider very questionable backgrounds.
Yes.
But he still redeems people with from all walks of life. And I think that like one of I saw a recent story about a young white girl I think it was in Ohio. She was the only one she was protesting by herself.
I saw that.
And did you see that? And she was, and I think the police were like right there. But the way that she was treated, some of her explanation where she was saying that she was a racist in the past. And so that was a part of her. She said that she acknowledged what she did in the past, and she felt that she was a despicable person. She hates the person that she was in the past, but she's changed. And this was one of the ways that she wanted to make sure that she spoke up against that type of racism that she herself used to, participate in, and kind of just, so I just thought that, like, wow, that's basically what it looks like for us when we repent and turn away. There should be a difference in how we respond to certain things,
And the humility to admit that we weren't always perfect. Right. I mean, obviously, that's a godly sorrow that leads to repentance. Right. And I look back on some of the views that I had as a staunch Republican in my early 20s about women, about people of color, about how racism doesn't exist and sexism doesn't exist. And I'm like, thank God that, that he's changed my heart and my mind on these issues. But I was very stupid and I was wrong and I said harmful things, and we should all have the humility to be able to say that.
Right. Same here.
So along those lines, what are some of the specific issues that you've seen? I mean, we've already been talking about this, but some of the ones that we haven't mentioned yet, seen in how Christians are responding to matters of racial injustice, and what would you like to see mainstream Christians, I guess not mainstream, like more Christians doing differently?
I would like to see more conversations, less assumptions. And the reason I say that is because I have tons of white Christian friends that I know personally, that I'm friends with on Facebook, and I have maybe only one that has said anything about what's going on right now. So for the most part, it's almost as if this happened and then they just disappeared off Facebook. I don't know, but and then I did have one friend who, I'm not friends with her on Facebook, but she emailed me, and it was the most heartfelt thing that she could have ever done. Like, I told her she doesn't know how much it meant to me that she took the time to just say, you know what, I don't understand all of this. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is this is wrong. And I thought about you and your family and your boys, and my heart breaks for you. And she just showed that she cared. So to me, it's just like, and when it comes to the assumptions, I feel like instead of assuming that every Black person that says Black Lives Matter agrees with every point of the Black Lives Matter organization, just ask. Mm-hmm. I've told a number of people that instead of assuming things, just ask questions. Ask, if I say systemic racism, ask me what I mean. If I say social justice, ask me what I mean. Don't assume that my definition of what social justice is the same definition as what Al Sharpton says when he's talking about social justice. So I think that there needs to be more conversations where we're willing to listen to one another. And you know what? Those conversations I think they probably need to happen off of social media. It may mean a phone call or meeting up with somebody to go get coffee or something where it's we have more human interaction, because I think that a lot of the issue is probably that we're trying to do too much over social media. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot easier to be behind a computer screen and just, sending people insensitive videos or comments as if that's going to, foster any type of constructive dialogue. So,
it's like everybody
I would definitely like to see
video triggered.
Right. It's almost as if some people have like a stash of these videos. It's like, okay, here's a Thomas Sowell video on why systemic racism doesn't exist, or X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, that shuts down conversation between us. But I am appreciative of the fact that I have had a few different people that have reached out to me personally and asked me for suggestions on books that they can read. And so I've been able to send them books that they can read. And then I even said, hey, after you read it, we can discuss what you read, and, you can give me your thoughts and I can give you your thoughts. So I think that there definitely just needs to be more off of social media type of dialogue between people who really care about what's going on and really want to see solutions come out of this.
Yeah. I think for when it comes to power dynamics,
mm-hmm.
and I mean, I say this in myself all the time, that when you're used to being someone whose voice is listened to, your default in every conversation is to be the one talking and explaining and,
right.
opining. And it's like, okay, why don't we just take a back seat and let the people who know what they're talking about talk and listen to what they have to say? We don't always have to enter every conversation like gracing the world with our viewpoint. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which I probably have done that in this interview, but
no, but I think too, like, your perspective is important. I think that there are Black people out there that have that type of mentality to where it's like, I don't want to hear what any white person has to say about X, Y, and Z. But like I said, there are some of us who feel like we do want to have positive dialogue, and we do want to, I think that everybody at their core wants to see our country overcome a lot of this that has been going on for so many generations. Like, nobody wants to continue to experience racism or to feel like we have to continue to validate that we're human, or
right.
Nobody wants to live their life in that way. Like that, to me, that's not really feeling like you can flourish as a human being and the fullest extent of yourself. Where and I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that that's what it's like being Black in America. We have to, in a sense, kind of switch. Like in certain contexts, I know I can be this way, but then here I have to act in a different way. Like for my husband, he knows that he has to make sure nobody views him as a threat, because he's a big muscular guy. He's bald. He has a beard, but he's the sweetest. I mean, he's the sweetest person in the world. But if somebody is just looking at him, they can assume a million different things. And with his job, he's had the police called on him because people don't believe that he's who he says he is. So it's just like the reality of living with that every day. It's hard. So I would say also to have patience with a lot of Black people that they may encounter, because you never know what people have gone through. And so it may be something that is said or done that just is a trigger for them. And so they may respond immediately with anger or, whatever. But just having patience and compassion with people, because you never know what they've been through in their life as far as race.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Thank you. Along those same lines, you said in this conversation, you said when we were talking previously, that a lot of times these things come up, the church responds to them the exact same way that it did last time, and we never make any forward progress. So let's, fast forward a few years from the moment that we're at right now. What would be some indicators 5 years from now that that actual meaningful progress has been made? Like what change? What would look different?
I would say that we would have more Christian organizations that are leading the way from a biblical framework, as far as how they're addressing the issues within society. So I think that for me personally, I think a lot of that is going to have to be what is taught. So, for example, I think that there are far too many white evangelical Christians that don't have a proper understanding of government and what constitutes a legitimate government from a biblical perspective. And so I think that instead of there are, I guess, and it may be more, I don't want to say libertarian, but in a sense, libertarians, their view of law and justice and all of that is more so biblical, not completely, but I do think that a lot of the reasons why we have people responding the way that they do when it comes to things that the police are able to get away with is because people use Romans 13 in such a, it's just teaching blanket obedience to governing authorities. And I think that has a lot to do with why people respond the way that they do. I know racism is involved, but at the same time, it's if you have an incorrect view of government, then you're going to excuse certain things, that normally you would be able to see aren't in line with, biblical orthodoxy. So,
right.
I would say definitely there's going to have to be more taught when it comes to social justice as well.
Yeah.
And, they don't have to call it social justice if that's a trigger word for them, but we need to address, injustices in our society and how we are called to respond as Christians. So I would say, so just to reiterate, I would say what's being taught. So there has to be a fundamental change in people's understanding of biblical law and justice, what constitutes crime, and the idea behind locking people in cages, and is that biblical? Is that restorative? Does that give restitution to victims? So I've been able to have some conversations with people, and they're hearing these things for the first time. So, but people are receptive. And then the funny thing with hearing defund the police is it's the climate is prepared basically for the church to be able to address these issues.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would definitely say a change in belief, a more biblical understanding of biblical law and justice and how that looks in society, and also more organizations that are in the forefront of how that is fleshed out in society when it comes to law and justice, and standing up for fair treatment of all image bearers of God.
Yes, amen.
And I would say a different response. I think that we'll see progress whenever we don't associate ourselves so much with a political party to where we refuse to speak on issues that the Bible calls us to speak to.
Absolutely. That's what I was just about to say. I think a huge sign of maturity in the church for me would be that we're not triggered by phrases that sound too liberal, that we can deal with ideas, with humility, and not freak out because it sounds like the other political party,
Right. One of the things that I learned from that, I think it was about almost 3 years that I told you that I took to just step away from political engagement is to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a part of the way politics works, nobody asks questions. It's just like people say certain things and then we assume that they mean one thing, and then we go from there. But I think that if we take time to just to talk with people, maybe in private messages or whatever, but just to ask people, like, what when you use this term, what do you mean, or what is this? I think that's just something very just at a basic level that would cause us to have better dialogue with one another.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because I think there's a lot of dialogue that doesn't happen in good faith, but a lot of times it's like we take terms that we hear from other people and we redefine them ourselves, and then we insist on having all conversations from the premise that our definition is what everyone means, even though the original people who used it meant something totally different by it. But so I know we're running long, so we'll just wrap this up with one last question. And you've already talked about some of this. We want to encourage people to educate themselves about and not rely too much on, I know some Black brothers and sisters that I've seen have expressed some exhaustion about being constantly asked to educate us. And, as white people are starting to wake up and they're like, oh, this is really bad. Can you explain to me how it's bad? And a lot of Black people are like, we've been explaining it for like 300 years. Just read the books we already wrote. But that being said, like, what are some things that brothers and sisters in good faith who want to address this can start doing right now, like on a daily basis, to serve and to bless our Black brothers and sisters and show solidarity, but not paternalism, and especially from a, like you said, libertarian or theonomist viewpoint?
I would say to keep, I've been really encouraged by a lot of the things that I've seen, whether it's you or Joel. I could name so many people where I've been so encouraged by the things that they're sharing, the ways that they're expressing why Black Lives Matter to them, and why really us valuing one another is so important, and how that we're all connected when it comes to the gospel. And I would say definitely reading, which I see a lot of them, as far as the ones that I know, a lot of them are already doing, having an understanding of, from a historical context, systemic racism and the racism in the housing industry, education. So I would say definitely having probably engaging. Well, I wouldn't just say, well, I'll say this. I think that from my perspective, the best thing that they can do is to engage other white people, because if they're in solidarity with us, then we already know that they are.
Right.
So the best thing that they can do is to keep, in a sense, like going against the culture, and so that people know, okay, here's a white brother or sister who is standing in solidarity with other Black Christian brothers and sisters, and here's why they're standing, why they're doing what they're doing. This isn't political. I think that maybe having opportunities where they share why they're doing what they're doing, because I think that we can get to where we're trying to address the culture, but we're not sharing the fact that we do this because of the gospel.
Right.
So, this isn't a political thing.
Performative.
So, right. We're doing this because of the gospel. So, to be honest, I'm really encouraged by what I've been seeing. And I'm just hoping that we continue to see more. I'm encouraged because, like I said, there are people that have been reaching out to me about books that they can read, and so I've been able to share that with them.
If you have sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have a list that you typically send to people that you want me to add on the post when we put this episode up, I can definitely do that so people have a quick resource list. Yeah, because I think that most of the progress that I've seen has come from people understanding historically things that have happened that they had no idea happened. And then that starts to change people's understanding and their perception of certain things. So yeah, I've been reading Stamped from the beginning, and it is blowing my mind. I'm like, right. I thought I understood some stuff, but this is like so illuminating. Right. That's one great thing about the internet. People have access to so much more information now. So I don't know. I think that this is going to continue to kind of get the ball rolling as far as like progress. But at the same time, we know that there's going to be, some secular solutions when it comes to what's going on that are going to be problematic as well. And so we'll have to be able to address those as well, as they come up. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shatoya. It has been just such a pleasure having you here. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for reaching out to me. And, I really enjoyed being able to talk about this with you. Thanks. Me too. Thank you for listening. This has been The Monstrous Regiment.
Thank you for listening to The Monstrous Regiment. We hope this podcast inspires and equips you to go and exercise dominion for Christ's kingdom, terrible as an army with banners. The Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network brings to you a complete lineup of podcasts where you will hear practical and tactical theology. Our desire is not simply that you consume our shows, but that you also live out your faith in every area of life. We can talk all day long about these things, but if we fail to put them into practice, then we fail as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, our King. Subscribe now to your favorite Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network shows, or you can subscribe to the Reconstructionist Radio Master Feed, where all of the content we produce, including the audiobooks and audio articles, will pop up as soon as they are available. And don't forget to visit reconstructionistradio.com to volunteer as a narrator or to partner with this ministry financially. May the Holy Spirit stir you into action for Christ and His kingdom.